The day HOA President Priscilla Hartwell showed up at my dock with a sheriff's deputy and a fraudulent lien to steal my 38-foot naval patrol boat, she made the biggest mistake of her entitled life. Picture this: 6 a.m., fog rolling off the Oregon coast, the rhythmic clank of rigging against masts mixing with that diesel and kelp smell that means home to any sailor. I'm out there polishing brass on my restored Coast Guard cutter, 3 years of blood, sweat, and my entire inheritance poured into this beauty, when I hear designer heels clicking on weathered dock planks like a death march. What would you do if your HOA Karen tried to hijack your $80,000 boat because you planted the wrong bushes? Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what's the most insane HOA power trip you've witnessed? By the time that judge finished destroying her, Priscilla lost her house, her marriage, and $350,000 she didn't have. But this nuclear revenge story starts with native plants. My name's Marcus Reed, and at 52, I thought I'd earned some peace. 24 years in the Navy as an electronics technician, lost my wife Sarah to cancer 3 years back, and inherited this little slice of heaven from my Uncle Pete, a weathered cottage on Sunset Cove, Oregon, where the Pacific crashes against black rocks and the air tastes like freedom. The boat? That's my lifeline. Uncle Pete left me just enough to buy this decommissioned Coast Guard cutter from government surplus. Spent 3 years rebuilding her from the keel up, rewiring electronics with the patience of a monk, refinishing teak until my fingertips were raw, polishing every piece of brass until it gleamed like sunlight on water. The sharp bite of marine varnish in my nostrils and the satisfying weight of quality tools in my hands kept me sane through the grief. Sunset Cove. Marina sits in a protected harbor with 150 waterfront homes, each one worth more than most people make in a decade. The HOA, Sunset Cove Homeowners Association, came with the territory like a tumor you didn't know you had. Mandatory membership, monthly dues, the usual suburban control structure transplanted to paradise. For 2 years, life was perfect. I helped neighbors with electrical work, shared fresh Dungeness crab from my traps, and kept to myself. The rhythmic creak of weathered dock planks under my boots, the sharp scent of creosote and kelp at low tide, the gentle ping of rigging in the coastal breeze. This was healing. Then Priscilla Hartwell slithered into our lives. Picture a 48-year-old real estate agent crossed with a prison warden, always dressed like she was heading to a yacht club execution. Crisp white capri pants that probably cost more than my monthly groceries, designer sunglasses hiding cold blue eyes, driving a BMW so blindingly white it looked like a traveling cocaine advertisement. She'd fled some California gated community after, I later learned, being forced out for overzealous enforcement practices. Within her first month, she was campaigning for HOA board. Her pitch? I'm here to be a community steward. Property values are everyone's sacred responsibility. The woman spoke about herself in third person like some demented monarch. Priscilla believes the community needs structure, and Priscilla thinks standards have been neglected. Watching her speak felt like listening to a snake oil salesman who'd convinced herself the poison was medicine. 6 months later, HOA president. The voting was close, 78 to 72. But enough newcomers bought her property values gospel to put her in power. That's when the reign of terror began. I planted native Oregon grape bushes along my property line, gorgeous plants with golden flowers that local birds love. Completely legal, totally normal coastal landscaping, but apparently not perfectly Priscilla approved. The certified letter arrived like a death warrant. Notice of violation. Unauthorized vegetation modification contrary to HOA aesthetic guidelines. Fine, $200. Compliance required within 14 days or face escalated penalties. I actually chuckled while reading it. Oregon grape grows wild all over the coast. It's like getting fined for having too much sand near the beach. I dug out my HOA covenants, found the landscaping section, and there it was. Native Pacific Northwest vegetation is encouraged to maintain natural coastal environment. Crystal clear, except to Priscilla. The covenants specifically allow native plants, I told her over the phone, listening to her BMW's engine purring like a well-fed predator. Priscilla has interpretation authority over all landscaping decisions, she replied, her voice carrying that special blend of condescension and barely controlled rage that only comes from someone drunk on tiny amounts of power. The fine stands. Payment expected within 10 business days. Show me where the president gets interpretation authority. Click. She hung up like I'd asked to see her tax returns. That's when I started investigating. Turns out, in her first year as president, Priscilla had systematically fined 17 residents. Always $200. Always with that magical phrase, interpretation authority. Mailbox 6 inches too close to street. Trash can visible during non-collection hours. Boat dock paint, inappropriate maritime color. 17 violations, 17 fines. $3,000 $400 collected into HOA accounts under Priscilla's personal management. Meanwhile, her golf buddies' violations got polite verbal warnings. I should have realized someone willing to steal $200 over legal landscaping was just getting started. 3 weeks after the Bush incident, Priscilla discovered her true calling: maritime piracy. The violation notice arrived hand-delivered by the Queen herself. I watched from my kitchen window as she tottered down my dock in those death-trap heels, the hollow clacking echoing off the water like a woodpecker with anger management issues. She actually had the audacity to board my boat, uninvited, running her blood-red fingernails along my freshly varnished rails like she was checking for dust. Notice of commercial vessel violation. Military surplus watercraft constitutes commercial use, prohibited under HOA Section 12.3. Vessel removal required within 30 days. Daily penalties, $500 until compliance achieved. Commercial vessel? I'd been watching dentists and hedge fund managers zoom around in cigarette boats that burned more fuel in an hour than I used in a month. But somehow my lovingly restored patrol boat was the community menace. I grabbed my covenants and found Section 12.3. Recreational watercraft permitted at private docks subject to reasonable size and safety restrictions. Nothing about commercial use. Nothing about military origins. Nothing that gave Priscilla authority over anything floating. But here's where she revealed her true cunning, and why she was far more dangerous than your average power-tripping suburban dictator. Priscilla had hired a maritime lawyer, not to check her own authority, but to find legal loopholes she could exploit. She discovered that military surplus boats exist in a bureaucratic gray zone, originally commercial Coast Guard vessels, then decommissioned and sold to civilians. Her strategy? Create enough legal confusion to justify seizing my boat while I fought through months of appeals. My counterpunch came straight from my Navy training. When facing superior firepower, gather better intelligence. I drove to Newport Coast Guard Station and found Chief Petty Officer Martinez, who'd handled my boat's transfer 3 years earlier. The man took one look at Priscilla's letter and started laughing so hard he snorted coffee through his nose. "Sir, this lady's either completely ignorant or completely crooked," Martinez wheezed, wiping his face. "The second that boat got recreational registration and left military service, it became a pleasure craft. Period. I've got buddies with converted destroyer escorts they use for fishing trips, still recreational." He stamped my documentation with the enthusiasm of someone who dealt with too many civilian bureaucrats trying to play military expert. But I needed local allies who understood Priscilla's real game. That's when I discovered the underground resistance. Harold Brennan lived 3 houses down and had been documenting every HOA meeting with the obsessive precision of a war crimes prosecutor. His filing system included audio recordings, financial discrepancies, and a color-coded chart tracking Priscilla's selective enforcement patterns. The man should have worked for the FBI. Elena Vasquez, property law attorney, had received her own $200 fine for growing unauthorized herbs in window boxes. Turned out those dangerous herbs were basil and oregano. She was furious and offering free legal advice to anyone willing to stand up to President Priscilla's petty tyranny. Bobby Kowalski ran the Marina's boat service and knew every vessel classification in federal law. He'd watched Priscilla's inspection of my boat through binoculars and was ready to testify that she wouldn't know a naval cutter from a rubber dinghy. The sweet taste of rebellion was brewing in our little coastal community. Armed with federal documentation and growing witness support, I felt confident enough to call Priscilla's bluff. Then she launched her nuclear option. Certified letter, carbon copied to all 150 homeowners like a public execution notice. Property lien warning. Continued violation of HOA regulations creates liability for accumulated penalties. Line proceedings will commence unless immediate vessel removal achieved. Current penalty total $2,700, $2,700 for owning a legal boat. The evening carried panicked phone calls between neighbors like wildfire spreading through dry grass. Suddenly, everyone was asking the same terrifying question. Could she actually steal our homes? Elena's answer chilled my blood. Not legally, but fraudulent liens can cloud your title for months while you fight them in court. She could force you to sell or refinance just to pay legal fees. That night, listening to waves lap against my dock like funeral drums, I finally understood Priscilla's true nature. This wasn't about property values or community standards. This was systematic extortion disguised as civic duty. She'd found the perfect scam. Use HOA authority to extract money from neighbors too intimidated to fight back. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd picked a target who'd spent 2 decades defending America from people exactly like her. The next morning, I declared war. War, it turns out, turns ordinary people into monsters. And monsters make catastrophic mistakes. Priscilla's next move proved she'd completely snapped. I found the manila envelope duct taped to my door like a ransom note, the adhesive still tacky from her sweaty fingers. Inside, backdated HOA board meeting minutes claiming an emergency session had unanimously voted to ban all military surplus vessels. The document looked official, letterhead, signatures, even a notary stamp. But I'd spent enough time analyzing enemy intelligence to spot forgery like a bloodhound smells fear. Priscilla hadn't just faked the minutes. She'd broken into the community center at night, used the official HOA letterhead and seal, then forged every board member's signature, including Harold Brennan's, who was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee when I showed him his alleged approval of my boat's banishment. "Sweet Jesus," Harold whispered, his weathered hands trembling as he studied the forgery. She made my signature look like a drunk toddler wrote it with a crayon. That's not even close to how I write. My arthritis makes me press harder on the downstrokes. The acrid smell of Harold's black coffee mixed with salt air drifting through my screen door as Elena arrived, camera in hand, documenting this latest escalation like a crime scene photographer. My counterpunch was surgical. Let her dig her own grave while I collected the shovels. I called the other board members. Patricia Wong was visiting her daughter in Maui during the alleged emergency meeting, had the hotel receipts to prove it. James Morrison was in Portland holding vigil at his father's deathbed. Susan Delacroix started laughing so hard at her forged signature that she nearly choked on her morning tea. "That psychotic woman made my name look like chicken scratch written during an earthquake," Susan gasped. "I've been signing legal documents for 30 years. This looks like she practiced tracing it from a grocery store receipt." But Priscilla's desperation transformed her into something truly dangerous. The next week, she actually filed the fraudulent lien with the county recorder's office, $2,700 for unpaid penalties and emergency vessel removal fees, officially clouding my property title based on completely fabricated authority. The taste of pure fury is metallic, like licking a battery while someone steals your life savings. This deranged woman was trying to steal my house with forged documents and criminal lies. That's when our peaceful community exploded into civil war. The monthly HOA meeting became Gettysburg in a community center. 200 residents packed into a space designed for 50, the air thick with anger and the nauseating sweetness of Priscilla's perfume as she stood at the head table like Napoleon addressing his final battle. "Priscilla believes this community supports maintaining the highest standards of waterfront living," she announced, her voice carrying that special tremor of someone whose reality had completely detached from Earth. Harold stood up, waving the forged minutes like evidence at a war crimes trial. "When exactly did this emergency meeting happen?" Because according to county records, the community center was locked and 3 board members were in different states. "Emergency authority supersedes normal procedures when community safety is threatened," Priscilla replied, her white knuckles gripping the podium as sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool evening. "What emergency authority?" Elena demanded from the back, her attorney voice cutting through the crowd noise like a prosecutor cross-examining a liar. "Cite the specific covenant section that allows meetings without proper notice and board member presence." Priscilla's face turned the color of raw hamburger. Priscilla doesn't owe explanations to residents who actively undermine community protection efforts. That's when Bobby Kowalski stood up, all 6'4" of sun-weathered marina muscle and zero patience for bureaucratic bullshit. "Lady, I've been fixing boats in this harbor for 20 years. That man's vessel is safer and cleaner than half the floating disasters these weekend warriors drag in here. You want dangerous? Let's talk about the Henderson cigarette boat that dumps more oil than a Texaco refinery." The room detonated. Neighbors erupted like pressure cookers, shouting their own Priscilla horror stories. The Morgans screamed about $200 fines for wind chimes. The Delacroix family detailed penalties for unauthorized rose bushes. Mrs. Patterson revealed her fine for using the wrong shade of mailbox paint. Through the chaos, Priscilla sat frozen like a deer watching headlights approach, completely oblivious that she'd just created her own firing squad. But I was done playing victim. Time for offense. The next morning, I hired forensic accountant Jennifer Walsh to audit every financial transaction in Priscilla's 3-year reign of terror. What she discovered made forgery look like jaywalking. Jennifer Walsh had been hunting financial criminals for 15 years. When she called me 3 days later, her voice carried the barely contained excitement of someone who just struck oil in their backyard. "Marcus, sit down and pour yourself something strong. What I found isn't just theft. It's a criminal enterprise that would make the mob jealous." The numbers hit like a sledgehammer to the gut. Over 3 years, Priscilla had systematically stolen $67,000 from our community. She'd fined 89 households illegally, collected the money, then created a fake consulting company called Sunset Cove Administrative Services to launder the cash through fake invoices to the HOA budget. But here's where it got diabolically clever. Priscilla had been using stolen HOA funds to pay the legal fees for her husband Reginald's SEC investigation. She wasn't just stealing from neighbors, she was using our money to defend her family's white-collar crimes in federal court. The woman had turned our HOA into her personal criminal ATM. My counterpunch was nuclear. I hand-delivered Jennifer's forensic report to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, the Oregon Attorney General, and the IRS simultaneously. This wasn't civil court material anymore, this was federal racketeering. But Priscilla's response proved she'd completely lost her grip on reality. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of splintering wood and metal grinding against concrete. My boat was listing badly, dock lines severed with fresh gouges spelling "Die Nazi" carved into her starboard hull. The acrid smell of spray paint mixed with salt air as I discovered every brass fitting had been attacked with what looked like a crowbar wielded by someone in the middle of a complete psychotic break. Then came the character assassination blitzkrieg. Anonymous flyers appeared overnight in every mailbox, featuring a doctored photo of me in my Navy uniform next to images of assault rifles I'd never owned. The headline screamed, "Dangerous veteran threatens families. Armed military extremist operating in our community." The taste of pure rage is metallic, like chewing tinfoil while watching someone burn down your life. But Priscilla's nuclear option involved weaponizing law enforcement. She filed 6 police reports in 4 days. Weapons violations, my legal fishing rifles, threatening behavior, asking her to show legal authority, suspicious nighttime activity, working on my own boat, possible drug trafficking, I had marine fuel containers, disturbing the peace, using power tools during legal hours, and terrorist threats, asking neighbors to support my position. Deputy Martinez from the county sheriff's office became my unofficial babysitter, showing up for each bogus investigation with mounting frustration etched across his weathered face. "Sir, I've responded to more calls about you this week than I get about actual drug dealers," Martinez told me after the 6th false report, his voice carrying the exhausted patience of someone dealing with a chronic mental patient. "Either you're the most incompetent terrorist in Oregon, or someone's using my department as their personal harassment service." The community war reached its breaking point at the emergency HOA meeting Priscilla had called to address security threats. 250 residents crammed into the community center like angry hornets in a disturbed hive, the air thick with hostility and Priscilla's overwhelming desperation perfume, some sickly sweet designer fragrance that smelled like rotting flowers and failed dreams. Priscilla has documented evidence of systematic intimidation and possible terrorist sympathies among certain residents, she announced from behind the podium like a dictator addressing her final rally, her hands visibly shaking as sweat stained her white blazer despite the cool evening air. Harold erupted from his seat, waving a manila folder thick as a phone book. "I've got documentation, too. 3 years of your criminal fraud, forged signatures, and systematic theft from every family in this room." That's when her husband Reginald made his fatal mistake. The 6-foot investment banker stormed toward Harold with the aggressive swagger of someone accustomed to intimidating people with money and legal threats. "You senile old fool, you have no idea what kind of legal hell you're about to—" Bobby Kowalski unfolded from his chair like a spring-loaded bear trap, all 6'4" of sun-weathered muscle and zero tolerance for entitled bullies threatening elderly neighbors. Touch that man and I'll feed you your own teeth, Bobby growled, stepping between Reginald and Harold with the casual confidence of someone who'd been winning bar fights since the Carter administration. The room went dead silent except for the sound of 200 people holding their breath and someone's child whimpering in the back. That's when Elena stood up and dropped the atomic bomb. Before anyone else threatens violence, she announced with the calm authority of a federal prosecutor, everyone should know that as of this morning, Priscilla Hartwell is under federal investigation for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The FBI raided her house 6 hours ago. Priscilla collapsed into her chair like a punctured balloon, finally understanding that her kingdom of theft had just become a federal case. But desperate criminals make desperate choices. The FBI raid had been swift and merciless. While Priscilla was busy turning our community meeting into her personal Nuremberg rally, federal agents were photographing every document in her home office, seizing computers, and freezing bank accounts faster than a Vegas casino catching card counters. But the real atomic bomb came from the last person anyone expected, her own husband. Elena called me at 6 a.m., her voice crackling with the manic energy of a prosecutor who'd just been handed a signed confession from Al Capone himself. Marcus, Reginald didn't just cooperate with the FBI. He's been secretly recording his wife's criminal confessions for 8 months. The man kept a literal audio diary of her crimes to protect himself when this whole thing exploded. The betrayal was breathtaking in its calculated coldness. When the SEC started investigating Reginald's investment firm for securities fraud, he'd hired a forensic accountant to audit his assets. That accountant discovered Priscilla had been funneling stolen HOA money into their joint accounts, making Reginald an accessory to federal racketeering charges that could destroy his career and send him to prison. So the investment banker did what rich sociopaths always do when facing consequences. He threw his wife to the sharks and chummed the water with evidence. The recordings were devastating. Hours of Priscilla bragging about stupid neighbors who pay whatever I tell them to, admitting she'd forged board signatures because those idiots would never approve my management style, and laughing about using HOA funds to pay their legal bills because these people are too dumb to audit a lemonade stand. But buried in those recordings was the confession that triggered our nuclear option. Priscilla admitting she'd never read the HOA incorporation documents, the same documents that contained Article 7, Section 3, stating that any board member who commits fraud while in office automatically forfeits their position and becomes personally liable for all damages to the association and its members, multiplied by triple damages under Oregon consumer protection laws. The musty smell of old legal documents in Elena's office mixed with fresh coffee as we calculated Priscilla's financial apocalypse. The math was simple and beautiful. $67,000 in theft became $201,000 in automatic triple damages, plus $75,000 in legal fees, plus $50,000 in court costs, plus punitive damages for systematic predatory fraud. Conservative total, $350,000 in personal liability, more than her house, more than their savings. More than Reginald's damaged investment firm could survive without bankruptcy. The power dynamic had flipped like a switch. Suddenly, Priscilla wasn't the neighborhood dictator. She was a bankrupt criminal facing federal prison and financial ruin. Every neighbor she'd illegally robbed was now a creditor with the full weight of federal law behind them. But the psychological revelation was even more satisfying than the financial destruction. Elena's investigation revealed Priscilla's true predatory nature. She'd systematically targeted elderly residents like Harold because they seemed less likely to fight back. She'd focused on newcomers who didn't know their rights. She'd selected victims based on perceived vulnerability. Single women, older couples, anyone who looked like they'd pay rather than resist. This wasn't random power abuse. This was calculated criminal hunting disguised as community service. For 3 years, our neighborhood had been living under a systematic predator who'd been slowly bleeding us dry while we worried about property values and community harmony. She'd turned our HOA into her personal protection racket, complete with threats, intimidation, and financial extortion. The sweet taste of approaching justice was like honey mixed with revenge. But Priscilla still didn't understand that her criminal empire was over. Cornered predators don't surrender. They lash out with desperate violence that usually destroys them completely. And she was about to make the final mistake that would bury her forever. The war room was my boat. Floating headquarters seemed perfect for planning the destruction of a land-based dictator. Every dawn, Elena, Harold, Bobby, and I gathered on the Semper Fi's deck like naval commanders plotting the D-Day invasion. the sharp smell of salt air mixed with Harold's industrial-strength coffee and the intoxicating scent of approaching victory. The gentle rocking motion cleared our heads. Or maybe it was just the poetic justice of planning Priscilla's annihilation from the very vessel she'd tried to steal with forged paperwork. Elena transformed my chart table into mission control, spreading legal documents like battle plans across the polished teak. "We're not just fighting a lawsuit anymore," she announced, her eyes gleaming with prosecutorial bloodlust. "This is coordinated federal warfare, criminal prosecution, civil destruction, and community revolution. We're going to obliterate her financially, legally, and socially." The strategy was three-pronged and absolutely merciless. Elena had compiled a RICO case file that read like organized crime prosecution. 23 felony counts including racketeering, mail fraud, identity theft, filing false police reports, conspiracy to commit fraud, and tax evasion. Each illegal fine was a separate federal crime. Each forged signature was identity theft carrying 5-year sentences. Each fake document mailed to residents triggered mail fraud statutes. The crinkle of evidence bags mixed with seagull cries as Harold organized 3 years of documentation that would make FBI investigators weep tears of joy. Jennifer Walsh's forensic accounting had revealed $67,000 in direct theft, but Elena's legal research uncovered Oregon's consumer protection nuclear option. Automatic triple damages for systematic fraud targeting vulnerable populations, plus attorney fees, plus punitive damages designed to bankrupt predatory criminals. The calculator's clicking sound mixed with mourning waves as we computed Priscilla's financial apocalypse. $201,000 in triple damages, $85,000 in attorney fees, $75,000 in court costs, plus punitive awards that could reach $200,000 for systematic targeting of elderly residents. Conservative estimate, $561,000 in personal liability. Enough to destroy her completely and leave her family financially ruined for decades. Bobby provided maritime warfare expertise, documenting every technical specification proving my boat was legal, properly registered, and safer than the floating disasters most weekend warriors operated. His expert testimony would annihilate any remaining claims about commercial use or community safety. This wasn't just about destroying one criminal, it was about immunizing our neighborhood against future predators. Elena had researched governance reforms that would make another Priscilla literally impossible. New bylaws requiring unanimous board votes for any fines, mandatory quarterly financial audits by independent accountants, strict term limits preventing long-term power accumulation, and transparent accounting with real-time access to all financial records. Professional management companies would handle operations, removing temptation for individual theft. The sweet taste of systematic justice was more satisfying than Elena's celebration brownies cooling in my galley. But our secret weapon was Reginald's ongoing betrayal. The investment banker was providing evidence faster than we could process it. Bank records showing Priscilla had been embezzling from the HOA reserve fund for 2 years. Email chains revealing her plans to maximize revenue extraction from vulnerable residents. And recorded phone calls where she laughed about bleeding these idiots dry before they realize what's happening. The community mobilization was like watching a sleeping giant awaken. Elena's victim coordination meetings packed the community center with 127 affected families, each bringing documentation of illegal fines, harassment incidents, and systematic abuse. The collective evidence painted a portrait of predatory criminal behavior that would horrify any jury. Mrs. Morgan's homemade dumplings mixed with the Kowalski's industrial coffee while Harold created master timelines correlating every illegal fine with Priscilla's personal financial crises. Bobby documented every boat harassment incident with photographic evidence and federal maritime law citations. The aroma of unified community fury was stronger than morning fog rolling off the Pacific. Elena coordinated with Channel 8's investigative team, who were preparing a 5-part exposé on HOA criminal abuse. The Oregon Attorney General was using our case as the template for emergency statewide legislation protecting residents from predatory board members. But the most delicious element was watching Priscilla's remaining support evaporate like morning mist. Her California allies fled faster than tourists from a tsunami warning. Even her criminal defense attorney withdrew, citing irreconcilable differences with clients' continued illegal behavior. The master plan was complete. Federal prosecution would imprison her, civil litigation would bankrupt her family, and community revolution would ensure no future predator could abuse our neighbors. Justice wasn't just coming. It was arriving with federal authority, financial ruin, and the unified vengeance of 150 families ready for war. Time to execute the final assault. Cornered predators don't just fight back. They try to burn down the entire forest to escape. And Priscilla Hartwell was about to prove that desperate criminals have no bottom to their evil. I woke up at 5 a.m. to the choking stench of diesel fuel and the metallic taste of pure terror. My boat was listing dangerously, fuel lines severed with surgical precision, creating a floating bomb that could have incinerated me, my neighbors, and half the marina. But this wasn't random vandalism. Someone had carved "Last Warning" into my cabin door with what looked like a medical scalpel. The acrid smell of spilled marine fuel mixed with the copper taste of adrenaline as I realized this wasn't harassment anymore. This was attempted murder with a signature. Security footage from the marina's upgraded cameras showed Priscilla arriving at 2:47 a.m. in full black clothing, carrying a professional marine mechanic's toolkit and what appeared to be detailed schematics of Coast Guard fuel systems. She hadn't randomly damaged my boat. She'd researched exactly how to create maximum catastrophic damage while maintaining the appearance of an accident. The woman had graduated from white-collar theft to premeditated homicide. My counterpunch was nuclear. I hand-delivered the HD security footage to FBI agent Rodriguez, Sheriff's Detective Martinez, and the Coast Guard's Criminal Investigation Unit simultaneously. Elena filed emergency attempted murder charges with federal enhancement provisions for attacking a veteran. But Priscilla's descent into criminal insanity was just beginning. The propaganda blitzkrieg that followed made Nazi Germany look subtle. Professional-grade flyers appeared overnight throughout the county, featuring my Navy service photo photoshopped next to images of Timothy McVeigh, bomb-making instructions, and fabricated quotes about eliminating community traitors. The headlines were designed to incite panic. Armed military extremist threatens mass violence. Dangerous veteran stockpiles weapons for community attack. The flyers included a fake manifesto I'd allegedly written. These property-obsessed parasites deserve everything that's coming to them. The bitter taste of absolute rage is like swallowing molten lead while watching someone incinerate your life with manufactured lies. Elena's investigation revealed Priscilla had hired Blackwater Political Research, a firm specializing in destroying political enemies through fabricated scandals. She'd blown $23,000 of stolen HOA funds to commission military-grade psychological warfare against a single neighbor who dared to challenge her theft. But her nuclear option was weaponizing the entire federal government against me. Within 24 hours, my quiet coastal home became the epicenter of a federal terrorism investigation. FBI domestic terrorism specialists, ATF weapons investigators, IRS criminal agents, and Homeland Security analysts descended like locusts responding to detailed reports claiming I was a radicalized veteran planning imminent mass casualties. The sound of combat boots on my dock at dawn mixed with the mechanical whir of evidence scanners as agents treated my fishing equipment like potential weapons of mass destruction. Special Agent Rodriguez led the investigation with professional thoroughness and mounting frustration. Mr. Reed, we've received 17 separate federal crime reports about your alleged terrorist activities in the past week. Either you're the most sophisticated domestic terrorist we've ever encountered, or someone's turned the United States government into their personal harassment service. 4 hours later, after agents found nothing but boat maintenance tools, Elena's legal files, and my collection of military history books, Rodriguez pulled me aside with barely contained anger. Sir, whoever's filing these reports has provided detailed federal building layouts, fabricated communications intercepts, and fake witness statements claiming you're planning to bomb government facilities. This isn't just harassment. This is systematic abuse of federal resources that's costing taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. The community response to Priscilla's terrorism campaign was like watching a sleeping volcano finally erupt. Instead of isolating me, her obvious descent into criminal insanity unified every neighbor who'd been sitting on the fence, watching our conflict from the sidelines. The emergency community meeting Harold organized violated every fire code in Oregon. 300-plus residents crammed into a space designed for 100, the air thick with fury and the sharp scent of collective outrage that comes when good people finally recognize genuine evil among them. Mrs. Patterson, an 82-year-old grandmother who'd whispered through 50 years of HOA meetings, stood up and roared like a lioness protecting her cubs. "This deranged woman has brought federal terrorism investigators to our peaceful neighborhood. She's spreading lies designed to get our neighbor killed. She's turned our community into a war zone because we dared to question her theft." The room didn't just erupt. It exploded with the unified fury of decent people who'd finally recognized a genuine sociopath operating in their midst. But Priscilla had one final desperate gambit that would transform her from federal defendant into federal fugitive. She was about to cross the line that would make her a wanted criminal in all 50 states. When cornered sociopaths realize they're about to lose everything, they don't just burn bridges. They try to incinerate the entire world. Priscilla Hartwell was about to prove that desperate criminals have no floor to their evil. The morning after federal agents cleared me of all terrorism allegations, I discovered what happens when a predator decides mutual annihilation is preferable to personal accountability. Taped to every mailbox in Sunset Cove was a single photocopied sheet that made my soul freeze. Complete identity theft packages for all 150 families, social security numbers, bank routing codes, credit card information, mortgage details, and children's personal data. Priscilla's handwritten note was brief and terrifying. "Drop all charges or watch your entire community become identity theft victims. You have 48 hours. But the identity theft blackmail was just psychological warfare. Elena's emergency investigation revealed Priscilla had already executed her nuclear option. She'd sold complete financial profiles for 73 residents to a Romanian organized crime syndicate for $180,000, using the money to hire a federal defense attorney specializing in racketeering cases and purchase airline tickets to 7 different non-extradition countries under false identities. The woman wasn't just threatening our community, she was systematically destroying it while preparing multiple escape routes like a war criminal fleeing justice. My counterpunch was swift and devastating. FBI agent Rodriguez activated the Bureau's Identity Theft Task Force, issued federal arrest warrants, and placed Priscilla on the terrorist screening database as a domestic threat capable of mass financial destruction. But her final acts revealed the true bottomless pit of her sociopathic nature. The arson came at 3:23 a.m. on a fog-shrouded Tuesday. I jolted awake to the chemical stench of accelerant and the terrifying orange glow of flames devouring the community center. The building housing 3 years of financial records, legal documents, and evidence of her crimes was melting into a toxic inferno that painted the coastal fog in hellish light. Security footage showed a figure in black tactical gear systematically splashing gasoline throughout the building before igniting multiple fire points with military precision. The acrid smoke of burning paper mixed with melting plastic created a poisonous cloud that forced evacuation of 6 nearby homes. But Priscilla had miscalculated. Elena had been storing encrypted backup copies of everything in her law firm's fireproof vault. The sweet taste of approaching final justice was like honey mixed with salt spray and the satisfying crackle of a criminal's desperation burning itself out. Witness intimidation followed within hours. Harold found a pipe bomb-shaped package on his doorstep with a note promising his house would accidentally explode if he testified. Mrs. Morgan discovered her car's brake lines severed with a message warning her to drive carefully or not at all. Bobby's boat was attacked with industrial acid, causing $18,000 in engine damage and a warning carved into his dock: sink or swim. Our peaceful coastal community had become a war zone ruled by a domestic terrorist in designer clothes. But Priscilla's final desperate act proved she'd completely severed all connection to human decency. The attempted kidnapping happened at 9:15 a.m. on a crystal-clear Thursday. Mrs. Patterson was walking her ancient golden retriever when Priscilla's white BMW screeched around the corner like a guided missile. Security cameras captured every horrifying second as Priscilla leaped from the car, grabbed the 82-year-old grandmother by her silver hair, and began dragging her toward the vehicle while screaming like a banshee about teaching these ungrateful parasites the price of betrayal. The sound of Mrs. Patterson's terrified screams mixed with her dog's frantic barking and Priscilla's inhuman shrieking created a symphony of pure evil echoing off the peaceful harbor. Only Bobby's heroic tackle — he dropped his coffee and sprinted 50 yards to body slam Priscilla onto the asphalt — prevented what would have been the kidnapping and probable murder of our community's most beloved resident. "You destroyed everything," Priscilla howled as police wrestled her into handcuffs, her $300 haircut disheveled, designer suit torn and bloody, makeup streaked with tears and psychotic rage. "I built this community. I made you people civilized. You're nothing without my leadership." Nothing, even facing federal kidnapping charges, attempted murder, and terrorism counts. She still believed she was the victim of an ungrateful community conspiracy. The neighborhood response was like watching a dam burst. Every fence sitter, every neutral neighbor, every family that had hoped to avoid taking sides. They all finally understood they'd been living next to a genuine monster who would literally murder elderly women to protect her criminal empire. Elena's emergency federal detention hearing was scheduled for the next morning. Agent Rodriguez had activated international manhunts for Reginald and the Romanian crime syndicate. Interpol was coordinating money laundering investigations across 14 countries. The reign of terror was finally over. Time for the public execution of Priscilla Hartwell's criminal empire. The federal courthouse in Portland had never witnessed anything like the siege of justice about to unfold. By 7 a.m., the parking lot resembled a refugee camp crossed with a media invasion. Satellite trucks from 6 states, federal agents coordinating security perimeters, and over 500 Sunset Cove residents who'd made the pilgrimage to witness the public annihilation of their tormentor. The detention hearing was supposed to be procedural theater. Federal judges routinely grant bail to white-collar defendants, even those facing serious charges. But Priscilla Hartwell had transcended suburban embezzlement to achieve domestic terrorism status, and Judge Patricia Brennan was about to deliver a legal reckoning for the ages. The main courtroom overflowed like a dam burst, with spillover crowds watching on monitors in 5 additional chambers. The air vibrated with 3 years of suppressed rage finally approaching cathartic release, mixed with the sharp metallic scent of justice that had been delayed but never denied. Elena commanded the prosecutor's table like a general preparing for total warfare, flanked by federal prosecutors, FBI agents, and evidence boxes stacked like ammunition for the legal execution about to commence. Across the aisle, Priscilla's $750 per hour defense attorney looked like a man contemplating career suicide. When bailiffs dragged Priscilla into the courtroom, the collective intake of breath was audible from 3 floors away. The immaculate HOA dictator had been replaced by a hollow-eyed creature in Orange County jail garb. Her once perfect hair hung in greasy strings like seaweed. Her makeup-free face revealed every crater of stress and malice, and her darting eyes searched for escape routes that didn't exist. Judge Brennan began reading charges with the methodical precision of someone conducting a formal execution. The defendant faces 27 federal felony counts, including racketeering, mass identity theft, witness intimidation through explosives threats, arson of public records, attempted kidnapping of an elderly victim, filing false terrorism reports, and operating a systematic criminal enterprise disguised as civic authority. Priscilla's attorney attempted to speak, but Judge Brennan annihilated him with a look that could melt steel. "Counselor, I've spent the weekend reviewing evidence that reads like a domestic terrorism manual. Your client attempted to kidnap an 82-year-old grandmother in broad daylight. She committed arson to destroy federal evidence. She sold 73 families complete identities to Romanian organized crime. She filed false reports claiming a veteran was planning mass casualties. Does she comprehend that she's facing multiple life sentences without parole?" That's when Priscilla's last grip on sanity shattered like crystal hitting concrete. "This is a conspiracy!" she shrieked, launching herself from the defendant's chair despite ankle shackles. "These people are the real criminals. They destroyed a public official. They're terrorists!" Bailiffs tackled her like linebackers, but Priscilla kept screaming with the unhinged fury of someone whose reality had completely detached from Earth. "I protected their property values. I gave them civilization. I maintained order while they lived like animals. Marcus Reed is the terrorist. He has military weapons. He threatened community safety. Why isn't he in federal prison?" The courtroom held its breath as 4 bailiffs wrestled the thrashing defendant back into her chair, but Priscilla wasn't finished with her public psychological collapse. "You don't understand what I sacrificed. 18-hour days, enforcing standards, collecting fees, managing ungrateful parasites. They owe me worship, not persecution." Judge Brennan's gavel cracked like a gunshot, but the silence that followed was broken only by Priscilla's animalistic panting and Mrs. Patterson's quiet sobbing in the gallery. The judge leaned forward with the cold authority of someone who'd sentenced war criminals and cartel bosses. Ms. Hartwell, in 3 decades on the federal bench, I have never encountered a defendant who so perfectly embodied the phrase clear and present danger to civilized society. You systematically transformed a position of community trust into a criminal enterprise, then escalated to domestic terrorism when your victims dared to seek justice. You are hereby remanded to federal maximum security custody without possibility of bail, parole, or plea negotiations. That's when I stood up in the packed gallery, surrounded by every neighbor Priscilla had terrorized, and delivered the words that had been burning in my throat for 3 years. Your Honor, Priscilla Hartwell spent 3 years proving that power without accountability is organized crime. Today, she learned that justice without mercy is called consequences. The explosion of applause lasted 7 minutes and could be heard 6 blocks away. Federal marshals didn't attempt crowd control. Even they understood this was a community finally exhaling after years of systematic oppression. As bailiffs dragged the still screaming Priscilla toward her cage, she managed one final shriek that perfectly captured her sociopathic delusion. "You'll all pay for destroying me. I was your salvation and you crucified your savior." Elena stood at the prosecutor's table with tears streaming down her face, surrounded by FBI agents who admitted this was the most satisfying federal case of their careers. Outside the courthouse, as news crews broadcast our victory to the world, Harold grabbed my shoulder and said, "Marcus, that woman just discovered the difference between leadership and dictatorship. Leaders serve their people, dictators serve themselves." The 3-year nightmare was finally over. Time for resurrection. 6 months later, Priscilla Hartwell's criminal empire lay in smoking ruins, and justice had been served with compound interest that would make a loan shark weep with envy. The federal sentencing was swift and beautiful. Facing overwhelming evidence and her own recorded confessions bragging about bleeding idiots dry, Priscilla pleaded guilty to all 27 felony counts to avoid life imprisonment. Judge Brennan's final words at sentencing became courthouse legend. "You weaponized community service into domestic terrorism. Your 25-year sentence should serve as a beacon warning every petty dictator that American neighborhoods are not your personal kingdoms." The financial obliteration was even more satisfying. The civil judgment awarded $1.2 million to victims, triple damages plus attorney fees plus punitive damages for systematically targeting elderly and vulnerable residents. Priscilla's waterfront mansion sold at federal auction. Her white BMW became a sheriff's department patrol car. Her designer wardrobe went to homeless shelters. She lost everything that defined her while gaining everything she earned: federal prisoner number 47291 and the eternal contempt of 150 families. But watching our community resurrect itself was the sweetest victory of all. The Semper Fi transformed from harassment target into neighborhood treasure. Every Saturday morning, the sound of children's laughter mixes with diesel engines purring as I take local kids on Coast Guard history adventures. The sharp scent of salt spray mingles with young voices asking endless questions about navigation, marine safety, and standing up to bullies. These floating classroom sessions fill my retirement with purpose Sarah would have loved. Our HOA became a model of democratic governance studied by communities nationwide. Harold's unanimous election as president launched the Priscilla Prevention Protocols, unanimous board votes for any penalties, monthly financial audits by rotating independent firms, strict 2-year term limits, and real-time transparent accounting accessible to every resident. Professional management eliminated temptation for individual theft. Elena's practice exploded into Oregon's premier HOA abuse prevention service. She's liberated 23 communities from corrupt boards and recovered $4.7 million in stolen funds. The state attorney general credits our case with inspiring legislation now protecting homeowners in 18 states from predatory board members. Mrs. Patterson, fully healed from her kidnapping trauma, founded the Sunset Cove Democracy Defense League, a volunteer network monitoring HOA meetings statewide for early warning signs of authoritarian abuse. At 83, she's become our region's fiercest guardian of neighborhood self-governance, armed with Harold's documentation methods and Elena's legal knowledge. The international justice was equally gratifying. Interpol dismantled the Romanian identity theft ring, arresting 19 criminals and recovering $5.8 million in stolen assets. Every affected family received comprehensive identity protection funded by Priscilla's seized properties. Reginald's Cayman Islands hideout lasted exactly 4 months before federal marshals dragged him back to face money laundering charges. His 20-year sentence and $2.3 million restitution payment completed the destruction of their criminal family enterprise. But my personal transformation amazed everyone, especially me. The grieving widower, who just wanted to restore his boat in peace, discovered leadership abilities that lay dormant for decades. My city council election led to championing transparency laws now used as templates across Oregon. The confidence born from defeating systematic corruption didn't just change my life. It revealed what ordinary citizens can accomplish when they refuse to normalize injustice. Every dawn, I wake to rigging singing in Pacific breezes and sunlight dancing off my perfectly maintained boat's brass fittings. The Semper Fi sits proudly at her dock, a 38-foot monument proving that sometimes the best response to tyranny is simply refusing to surrender your dignity. Our annual Harbor Heritage Festival draws 15,000 visitors who come to see the boat that sparked the HOA revolution. Schools bring students to learn about documentation, legal research, and community organizing. Law enforcement agencies study our evidence collection methods in their training academies. The festival funds our Standing Up Scholarship program, seeded with Priscilla's forfeited assets, supporting students pursuing careers in law, journalism, and public service. This year, 18 students received $73,000 total for essays about why ordinary citizens must challenge corrupt authority. And victory tastes like morning coffee mixed with salt air, sounds like children learning maritime history, and feels like a community that discovered its own strength. Drop your HOA horror stories below. Together we'll build an army of neighbors who refuse to bow to suburban dictators masquerading as community leaders. Hit subscribe for more David vs. Goliath victories where regular people use courage, documentation, and pure stubborn determination to destroy corrupt systems. Coming next, the retired librarian who exposed a $4.2 million school district conspiracy and sent 5 administrators to federal prison.